Hello, everyone. I can't see you too well, so pardon me if I'm squinting. And hello to all those people online out there and all the ships at sea. I'm very, very grateful for the invitation and so glad to be a part of the Dialogue Project. It's not only worthy, but it's essentially the same set of values and ideas that I've committed my professional life to and my life to, really. So I'm thrilled to be a part of this. Let me introduce our participants tonight before I give you a brief run of show. And you've heard the question, but I'll give it to you one more time again. First, let me introduce Jessica Vaughn. Jessica is the Director of Policy Studies for the Center for Immigration Studies, where she has worked for over 30 years. Her area of expertise is immigration policy and operations, covering topics such as visa programs, immigration benefits, and immigration enforcement and public safety. Jessica has testified before Congress dozens of times and also has helped state lawmakers and agencies handle the issue of immigration over her career. Prior to joining the center, Jessica was a Foreign Service officer with the State Department. Muzaffar Chishti is our other panelist. He is a senior fellow at the Migration Policy Institute. He has dedicated his life's work to U.S. immigration policy at the federal, state, and local levels and focuses on the intersection of labor and immigration law, immigration enforcement, civil liberties, and immigrant integration. He's also authored or co-authored over 100 publications on the various aspects of the U.S. immigration system, and he has also testified before Congress. So maybe at some point they can share what that's like. Our low bar will be to achieve something greater than the debates as they take place in Washington. So let's welcome, please, Muzaffar and Jessica out here to join us. Welcome to you both. I will just give a little rundown of what we have before us tonight. We're going to start with opening statements, and then there will be a period of rebuttals, which will come after the opening statements. And then we'll have about 25 minutes of discussion. It says debate on here. I think the goal here is, discussion for the purposes of illuminating this challenging issue before us. Then we'll have the audience Q&A, which you've already heard about. Then there will be the revealing of the voting, which I'm very excited about. And then we'll draw enormous conclusions from the vote. And just to remind everyone, the question up for discussion, which you all will be voting on, is should the federal government broadly seek to remove undocumented immigrants across the country? So I will not talk anymore. I will hand this over to Jessica for your opening statement.
Thank you, John, and thank you all for coming tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. Should the feds seek broadly to remove illegal aliens across the United States? My answer is yes, no question. Definitely. Both those who cross the border illegally and those who've been living in our country, in the interior of our country illegally. As the late great civil rights leader Barbara Jordan once said, a common sense immigration policy means those who should get in, those who shouldn't get in are not allowed in, and those who are here who should not be are made to leave. And that is indeed common sense, but not necessarily leaving always by arrest and detention, though that's appropriate for some. But the federal government also needs to try to induce illegal immigrants to voluntarily leave. In our history, at least as many people who are here illegally leave on their own as are forcibly removed during times when there is robust immigration enforcement. But why? It's not just a matter of, oh, we have to do this because it's the law, but it is because it's important because we do have a very generous legal immigration system. We may disagree on aspects of that legal system, But we have immigration laws, and it's a slap in the face to legal immigrants, really, when we tolerate illegal immigration. We take in about 1 million legal immigrants every year, plus almost that number of temporary guest workers who stay long-term. And there are 4 million people on the waiting list who've qualified for one of the categories of legal immigration, either by a family member or an employer, but who are waiting their turn to come here through our legal immigration system. So tolerating illegal immigration destroys the integrity of our legal system, and just as importantly, it can destroy public support for a generous legal immigration system if people feel that the rules are meaningless. So we're going to hear probably that trying to enforce immigration laws is very expensive and costly to taxpayers, but in reality, it is costlier to let people stay here illegally than it is to remove them or get them to go home on their own. And it's not just the initial support. You as New Yorkers have spent $5 billion just dealing with the recent influx of migrants over a couple of years for the initial services to them with shelters and food and so on. According to the Census Bureau, about 60% of illegal immigrant-headed households are accessing at least one form of welfare program, whether it's usually Medicaid, but it can also be food stamps or nutrition assistance. And that costs taxpayers $42 billion a year. There are about 4 million kids here whose parents are in the country illegally. They're in public schools, which is where they should be in school, but that is costly as well. That's costing $68 billion a year, according to some estimates. The National Academy of Sciences found that each illegal immigrant over their lifetime is a cost to taxpayers of $68,000. When you multiply that by the 8 million illegal immigrants that the Biden administration let in over the last 4 years, that adds up to $544 billion in costs to taxpayers at the federal and state level, which is far more than we might spend on immigration enforcement. Illegal immigration also causes labor market distortions, and it's important to remember that as well, that it denies job opportunities to U.S. workers, whether they're American citizens or legal immigrants. We have millions of Americans and legal immigrants who've dropped out of the labor market and who should have access to some of the job opportunities that employers are choosing to give to people who are not authorized to work in this country. And so we need to consider the benefits to those people as well of enforcing our immigration laws and deterring people from settling here illegally. And I look forward to hearing your questions and hearing what my colleague has to say about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. And Muzaffar, I'm led to believe that I can call you Moose.
Yes.
So yes. I'm not being overly formal. I mean, informal, I should say.
If you pronounce my full name, no one will know who you're talking about.
Moose, your 5-minute remarks are...
Thank you so much. And last time we met, Jessica and I were at a congressional committee hearing, and hope this produces better results than those hearings do. And thank you so much, John, for inviting us today. Thank you to the 92nd Street Y for hosting this very important debate in a highly polarized time in our history. We are part of civil society. Civil society must have dialogues like this where we have more light than heat. First of all, I hope I'll answer the question frontally, but I hope during the program we won't just talk about unauthorized immigration. We'll have an occasion to talk about the importance of immigration to our society, to our economy, and to our country. But just answering this question, by using the word broadly, I understood that to mean randomly, that everyone is subject to deportation. We have 13.6 million unauthorized people in the country. We certainly don't have the moral will, we don't have the political will, and we certainly don't have the resources to remove all 13.6 million people. I think every reasonable person knows that. Every law enforcement agency establishes priorities for its enforcement. And in the immigration context, we have established priorities for removal since the Ford administration, at least. That we know that someone who's a rapist or a murderer is to not be treated the same way as someone who's taking care of an elderly person at home, or a gardener, or a roofer. Someone who's been here for only 2 days should not be treated the same way as someone who's been here for 2 decades. That's where the distinction for priorities comes. Therefore, to have a random sort of undifferentiated enforcement thus serves no purpose. That's what the intent of this administration is. So when you issue orders, get me more immigrants every night, which is what the president has been doing, then what we do is we go after the lowest hanging fruit. And when we go after the lowest hanging fruit, we are not establishing the right priorities. First, what will happen when we want to remove all 13.6 million people under some fear? These are not people in a camp. They're not in Staten Island waiting to be picked up. They're not in Fort Briggs waiting to be, they're all living in communities inside our country. There are 8.7 million US households where there's at least one authorized person. There are 5.1 million kids, US-born kids, US citizens who have at least one unauthorized parent. That means we'll be socially tearing apart the country like that. Not to mention the economic and the labor market costs. We know unauthorized are concentrated in certain industries like agriculture and construction and elder care and home care and health care. We also know that during COVID, nothing proved the importance of unauthorized as COVID did. While we're all sitting at home in the comfort of our isolation, the person who was reaping our crops, the person who was harvesting our crops, processing our food, cooking our food, or delivering our food was most likely an unauthorized person. So if we engage in mass deportation, imagine the specter of that multiplying across all these occupations. The phenomenon that I think gets least appreciation about unauthorized immigration is the contribution they're making to the social security system. We'll get probably more to it. Our social security system is about to face bankruptcy. Most analysts believe that it's actually kept afloat by the contribution of unauthorized people who will never see the benefit of your social security system. But they are helping us keep the social security system intact. CBO recently said that if we have mass deportation, about $20 billion less will come to the social security system. So those are all of you here who are concerned about the solvency of the social security system. At least think of that when we think about mass deportation of people.
You leaving a little time on the clock there, Moose?
I underperformed.
Jessica, you are the first up for the rebuttal.
All right. Well, you know, one of the things Moose said was that, you know, during COVID, practically all of the people who were picking our crops or working in restaurant delivery or a number of other occupations were most likely unauthorized workers. That's not quite true, in fact. We've looked at the Labor Department data and found that there's no such thing as a job an American won't do. There's no such thing as an occupation, except for a couple of them that are mostly immigrant even. In fact, the occupation that has the highest percentage of immigrants is maids and housekeepers, and that is about half of them are actually not US citizens, and many of them are legal immigrants. So I think it's possible to overstate the importance of illegal immigrants in our workforce. I think people tend to associate it with certain occupations, but it turns out that actually there are lots of Americans who do those jobs, who would do those jobs if they had the opportunity, but who don't want to be paid as if they are labor trafficked into the country or as if they live in a country where the wages are much less than they are here in the United States. And about half of all illegal workers are actually working on the books, often using a stolen Social Security number or identity of a US citizen. Half of them are probably working off the books. But remember, it's true that illegal immigrants are dispersed throughout our country, but our question that we're considering today is, should the government seek to remove people from the country who are inadmissible? And I think unequivocally, our goal should be to discourage, deter, and if necessary, remove people who don't have a pathway to legal status.
The question is not should we. The question is it practical to do it? Is it moral to do it? Is it ethical to do it? Or does it come at a price? There are no abstract questions in society. That's the dilemma that we face. The question is not, should we have unauthorized immigration? Can we control it in the future? The call of the question is, should we remove 13.6 million people who are here? Of those, Jessica, about 8 million are working today. They're not sitting at home.
8 million.
8 million people are working. They're not sitting at home. So they're obviously participating in the labor market. They're obviously participating in the economy. And John, let me just raise one other question, which was actually made by Jay Powell on your Face the Nation, so which has gotten the least attention, that we actually had a soft landing after the COVID, which means no recession and no inflation, only because the unexpected surge in migration that had taken place in the last 4 years, which none of us agreed was a great thing. All I'm saying that even chaotic immigration, even uncontrolled bad optics immigration at the border actually contributes to the GDP of our country. And that's what led to the safe landing that we had. So if we kick out 13.6 million people, the impact it will have fiscally, economically, labor market picture of our country, and the social fabric of our country, due process of law, the Constitution, let's not ignore that.
Okay, we have ended the rebuttal portion, but I don't, I think we should just maybe stay right on this question. And Moose, let me follow up on what you're saying. Isn't it possible to acknowledge that that undocumented immigrants are participating in the labor force? But isn't Jessica's point, sure, they're participating, but those jobs could go to either those who waited in line or Americans who want those jobs? That it's not that they don't help the economy, it's that there are others who are involved.
We're still admitting people in legal immigration stream. There's just no doubt about that. We admit 1 million people a year, 1 million plus, for the last 25 years in this century. The reason we have unauthorized immigration, in my opinion, is because our legal immigration system is archaic. It's based on the 1952 architecture, which has been tinkered with only 2 or 3 times since, the last time in 1990. So if you're not we have 2/3 of our immigration based on family, only 15% of our immigration based on the labor market needs of our country. That includes the spouse and the kids of the principal applicant. That means only 7% of our selection system is based on labor market needs. Mm-hmm. That makes no sense to anyone, from a Trump supporter to an AOC supporter, with the result that the only way you can enter legally in the country today is if you are coming for a high-skilled job through an H-1B, which is therefore almost all, 80% of them, computer occupations. If you're a low-skilled person trying to get all these jobs in the sectors of the economy, there is no legal pathway for you to come. So in an odd way, therefore, when the laws of supply and demand are working magically, except instead of lawful ways for people to enter, they're using unlawful ways to enter to meet the labor market needs of our country. So if you want to answer this question, we should reform our legal immigration system. Mm-hmm.
Jessica, let me ask you, based on your remarks at the beginning, doesn't Moose have a point that part of that word should is that there is a balance of priorities in an American system, and that to deport or encourage self-deportation of that 13 million is such an enormous cost that it would come at the cost of other things that either that money or time and attention could go towards, especially if some portion of the undocumented population is, living good, otherwise noble lives. They have jobs, they have families, they're parts of communities. That idea of trading priorities.
Well, you can make an argument that our legal system needs to be reformed, but to me that is not an argument that we need to tolerate mass illegal immigration. That's not going to be targeted toward the labor market needs, if we have any, of our country or of our economy. We're a modern 21st century economy, and I think it's a real fair question to ask whether illegal immigration can possibly hope to help our economy grow and benefit Americans and legal immigrants if there's no relationship to our labor market needs. And I will keep coming back to this. We have to remember there are 6 million Americans who, for whatever reason, haven't had the opportunity of a college education, who have dropped out of the labor market. We do not have a labor shortage in this country. We probably have a shortage of people who want to work at below sustainable or self-sufficiency level wages. But we have a lot of Americans who are not in the labor market that I think we have, as a society, need to work harder to make employers compete for those workers. Because there are so many other social issues that depend on people working, or that are social problems that are exacerbated when people are not working. And so our government should be prioritizing opportunities for Americans and legal immigrants, rather than abandoning its responsibility to enforce our immigration laws, which, in addition to regulating labor markets, also keep us safe in some ways.
I'm going to step back just a second here. We'll get back to the economic effects and what they may and may not be at various different levels of deportation. But let me just ask a very broad question, which is, what is America's, and I'm going to ask this very broadly to both of you, because I think where you choose to take a hold of the question says as much as your answer to it. But what is America's moral obligation to immigrants, documented, undocumented?
That's a good question. I just don't think America's immigration policy should be framed by what is our moral responsibility towards immigrants. I fundamentally believe that. I think it should be based on our national interest, really. I mean, some people believe that we have lost sight of that, and I don't want to disagree with it. I think we probably have at some point lost. But looking forward, I mean, we hope that we'll overcome this unauthorized immigration debate. We're looking what should be the rational immigration policy for the country. These are not, Democratic facts or Republican facts. These are facts. We are an aging society. 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day in our country. There'll be more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18 by 2034. I'm not a demographer. My demographer friends tell me that's a milestone. Mm-hmm. So if we want to keep the labor market supply that we need, and much more the Social Security system, I have never paid more attention to Social Security, because all of us believe that we should get a Social Security check. The Social Security Trust Fund is going to be bankrupt in next 10 years. For Social Security system to remain solvent, it can't remain solvent with the present native-born population who are not producing kids at the rate that they used to. So for that system to be sustained, we need young, active, productive workers, and the native-born population not producing that. That's where the rationale for immigration comes. So we know that we need immigration. We need immigration probably, I can't say, more, for us to sustain the economic need of the country, we needed a level more than we have today in legal immigration. What that numbers we can debate. But I also grant you, John, that that's a crisis. We have a labor market, but we do have a border crisis. And we should address the border crisis. I think that's why we got here. I'm not ignoring the border. I think we do need to control the border crisis, but these are twin crises which should be dealt at the same time.
Jessica, your thoughts on the moral question?
Yes, I want to say, I will get to that one. I just want to say first, though, that our Social Security situation is not going to be solved through tolerating illegal immigration because it's just not enough people. And if they do stay, they're also going to be collecting Social Security. I mean, economists know that this is not the solution. There hopefully are some other ones, as I'm getting there myself. But on the moral question, I agree that our immigration policy should serve our national interest. But there are some moral questions that are important. One is that immigrants, regardless of how they come, of course, are people and should be treated humanely in every encounter with the government or with us. But you know, I believe very firmly that it is morally wrong to entice people to turn over their life savings to a criminal smuggling organization, to travel through multiple other countries, endure abuse and trauma because they think that they're going to be allowed to stay here indefinitely, and then work and be exploited, often in debt bondage or as a victim of labor trafficking. That happens primarily because of, has happened at least in recent years, because of our policies. And so I believe it is our moral obligation to put the criminal smuggling organizations out of business by not allowing them to exploit our borders and take advantage of people.
What to you, you talked earlier about a functioning system, what that would look like. That would require acts of Congress that Congress has been incapable of getting around to, despite both of you testifying before them.
Probably because of that.
What does a healthy immigration system look like to you?
Glad to answer. I didn't want to not agree with Jessica on how we treat people. I mean, we can have serve national interests and treat people morally at the same time. On what a selection system should look like. First of all, I think all projections suggest we will have a labor market crisis, just because of the aging society, if nothing else. Listen, Japan is our lesson. I mean, I just heard the Japanese prime minister saying that they think about 40% of Japanese municipalities may disappear because of the aging society. We don't want to be like Japan. If we don't want to be like Japan, we have to have sustained immigration. If we want to be the sole economic power in the world, we have to have sustained, robust immigration. So for us at the Migration Policy Institute, we think it should have three components. One is we should have family is important because family is the cushion that helps people when they migrate to the country. We should have the ability to have our family members with us. But I think right now, the fact that we have such a small, narrow pathway for labor-based immigration to enter is what is hugely responsible, not exclusively, but hugely responsible for the unauthorized flow. So we need workers, but they don't have legal basis. So we believe that the current system sort of does put priority on high-skilled immigrants, and we should broaden that. We should have what we have decided to call a bridge visa, which bridges temporary workers and permanent workers, because we call a temporary worker who's been here for 21 years, which is a lot of H-1B work. That makes no sense. At the same time, we should bridge occupations. And therefore, if we have low-skilled, mid-skilled, high-skilled people, they come through employer sponsorship, and they could have people don't need to necessarily live here for the rest of their lives. We should encourage circularity, but we should have flexibility. that the number of people we admit to should be determined by an independent body, which looks at labor market, economic factors. We need so many. That should decide the number.
And the third?
And the third is that we should continue to remain open to refugees.
Okay.
We have our obligation to the world to accept refugees.
Jessica, what's your feeling about what does a perfect system look like to you? And I'll just tack on a tiny little question, which is, is a perfect system in which that number of unauthorized crossings at non-checkpoint parts of the border goes to zero? Or do you think that even in a perfect system, there's always going to be some of that migrant number is going to be something?
I don't think there is a perfect system. It's a difficult question. The fundamental question of immigration policy is how many immigrants are we going to admit and in what categories? And it's a difficult question. It's a political question. It's up to Congress under our republic to make that decision. I don't think that illegal immigration is a result of dysfunctional legal immigration policy at all. Illegal immigration is a function of dysfunctional border policies where, in the existence of policies where people who show up at the border are allowed to come in. That's what has caused this, the unprecedented illegal immigration that we've seen over the last 4 years. But to answer your question about a better system, I think would be one that reduces the numbers overall, because we do not have a labor shortage either of low-skilled workers or high-skilled workers. Definitely admits refugees, people who have no other option but resettlement in a safe third country like the United States. I'd like to see more emphasis on immigrants who are here because they have an employment offer or they have skills to bring to our country. I think we could do that through a point system, similar to what some other countries have done by prioritizing those who are most likely to succeed here and be self-sufficient and contribute to our economy. And that would mean less family immigration. I think that our chain migration dominated system that we have now is archaic and not helping our economy. We should always allow people to bring spouses and their immediate family here, but I don't think we need to allow people to sponsor nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, cousins. I just don't, we have so many people who want to come here. I think we need to narrow that to the immediate family.
So the two of you don't agree on family. You appear to agree at some level, at least on refugees. On this question of a point system, and so more broadly, you have a disagreement about the labor shortage, and we'll get to that in a minute. But
I would say we probably disagree on the numbers.
That's right. So Moose thinks there's a larger labor shortage that requires a bigger pathway for legal. Your feeling is the numbers should go down because there are American workers, citizens, I should say, who could fill those jobs.
Right. We have the highest levels of people who have dropped out of the labor force than we've had in more than 20 years.
But you're okay with H-1Bs because that's not the people who dropped out of high school. That's the higher skilled.
Well, there isn't a shortage of technology workers either. The H-1B that you referred to is a temporary visa that is for college graduates. Those are not, it's been sold to the public as something that's highly skilled individuals. In fact, our research shows that most of them are working in entry-level jobs or trainee jobs, and they're brought in by staffing companies. Mm-hmm. So they're pretty ordinary workers for the most part, although there are, I think we need to fix that system so we do get skilled workers that employers want to bring in from abroad. I think we have to allow our employers to have access to global talent. Mm-hmm. The H-1B program is not necessarily doing that, though. Our legal employment-based green cards are, though.
Okay, so first of all, there's no law which allows nephews and nieces and cousins to come. Let's just put it out there.
Oh, it's family fourth preference.
Fourth preference is brothers and sisters.
And their children, which would be nieces and nephews.
When we accept someone, we don't tell them, please don't bring your 7-year-old child with you. That's not a moral system.
Right, but that's the niece or nephew of this.
I may agree with Jessica that some family systems need to be. I actually think the brothers and sisters increasingly doesn't make any sense. Not because I don't like brothers and sisters, but because the long wait for that is like 25 years. It just becomes meaningless.
It's a cruel joke.
It's really making mockery of our system. So accept the mockery and do something about it. I would take those family numbers into the larger employment system. Let me tell you the problem with the point system. First of all, the employer base that you just said goes against the point system. You have to make up your mind. Do you want employers to have primacy to select people or a point system? The problem with the point system is it privileges degrees. What has served our country more historically to present time is the fire in the belly of a person. Point system gives you 20 points for a PhD from whatever university in whatever subject in the world you want to ask for. That's why you have physicians driving cabs in Toronto. That's Toronto's system. That's not good. We want an employer to decide that I need this person, because I think in a capitalist system, employers should have the primacy to select, because only then someone who arrives at JFK knows the job they're going to. They're not just selected a point system and have nowhere to go to. That doesn't make sense. So therefore, I think the selection system which prioritizes employment picking, but it should be done broadly, not just H-1Bs. Low skill, high skill, mid skill. And then I think we should have a trial. Someone should be allowed to come for 3 years. Look at it, in 3 years, that person should have a choice. Look, I had my fill of working in New York, and I just want to go back to Mexico. Our present system doesn't allow people to do that. You have to burn your bridges once you accept a green card. So if you have 3 years, they would go back and maybe come back on another bridge visa 6 years down. I think that's more true of how people feel in the world today about their selves. And then at the end of 6 years, they have to make up your mind. But the most important thing why you think there's so many people on, the decision about how many people we should take should not be decided by CIS or MPI or by CBS or by 92nd Street Y. It should be decided by a bunch of experts, by labor market analysts, economists like the Federal Reserve, who decides our interest rate, not politicians. They're done by experts. That's exactly what should happen for immigration levels.
Jessica, let me ask you a question about the 6 million, I think you said it was, who have dropped out of the labor force because. So one of the arguments against the deportations is that in home health care, in construction, in agriculture, and we've talked to dairy farmers in Wisconsin whose entire workforce is made up of migrants. And they say basically they can't, unemployment is low and they can't find the workers. And then what they say is that if they did have American workers, the prices that everybody's so sensitive to would go up because wages would go up. So, I mean, you could very well say, that's exactly right. We want wages to go up. And so what's your rebuttal to the question of what happens to these parts of the workforce that are so dependent on migrants, and how does that affect the overall economy?
Well, the dairy industry is a very good example, actually, because in countries that don't have much immigration and not so much unskilled immigration, or less skilled, I should say, immigration, like in Europe, for example, the cows are milked by machines. That's a way around dependency on cheap labor, is to modernize, mechanize. And that works very well in Europe. But as long as American dairy farmers have access to a steady stream of workers who come across our borders illegally and are not made to clean up their act and do their due diligence, they are not going to be able to take that step, or there's no incentive for them to take that step toward modernization. And also, Milk prices are decided by a board of people, a board of experts who decide what the price is going to be of a gallon of milk. It's not decided by supply and demand. And there's ample evidence that if, broadly speaking, workers in agriculture received a 25% pay raise, that's not going to increase the price of the food that they're producing, because the price of food labor is a very small share of the price of food. It has more to do with the price of land, equipment, materials, packaging, and transporting it around the country, not what workers are paid. So, I think it's a fallacy to think that, we wouldn't be able to have fresh vegetables if we were to have workers who made a living wage.
But in your view, those workers, were the deportations to take place, would all be American citizens, basically?
Not necessarily. We have an agricultural guest worker program where the numbers are unlimited. And what we know is that when immigration enforcement increases, farmers hire legal workers through the guest worker program. That has happened in the state I live in, South Carolina. When the state introduced a mandatory E-Verify law, the ag businesses that needed workers brought them in through a legal visa system, and wages are controlled in that system, working conditions, they have to provide them with decent housing. So that has worked, although, agricultural workers, as you know, are a small share of the illegal population overall.
Let me ask you, before we run out of time for our discussion period, what's your assessment of what you've seen so far from the Trump administration as it relates to the big questions of immigration? Are they addressing some of them, exacerbating some, or off point?
Well, as I tell everyone, you have to pay attention to the fact that the president has decided that he won this election because of immigration, and that he won the last election because of immigration, no matter what everyone else thinks. So for him, it has become the #1 priority. It has also, therefore, become the #1 priority of every single cabinet member he has taken. So it's now, for every agency of the government, your first paragraph of your job description is how can you help the president in his deportation machinery? That's why we have now become all of government approach, and we are now enlisting many foreign countries in this enterprise. The fact that we are sending unauthorized immigrants to Panama so that we could get them out of our jurisdiction, so it becomes Panama's problems, not ours, is sort of, I think, taking immigration enforcement to a militaristic level that we have never seen before. I think it's, at some level, inhumane, talking about morality, to chain people at their ankles and to have martial music to go on when they're put on military flights to go to this country. Is that the best use of our time and resources? I would submit not. Therefore, if we can get to a nuanced enforcement system as against a random broad, I think we may all begin to agree on what enforcement should look like.
Jessica, your thoughts, although, of course, part of the show may be what's reduced part of the pull factor to the extent that it exists. So just that's one part of your thoughts, Jessica, on.
Well, people who are being restrained when they're removed are people who are a danger to others. That's why they're restrained, and that has been overwhelmingly the focus of these initial deportation efforts, no question. But yeah, I think the Trump administration is on the right track. They're looking to prioritize what they call their worst first approach. They've indicated that they're going to be holding employers accountable for hiring unauthorized workers. And they've moved to cancel some of the improper uses of parole that have allowed people to come into this country who weren't qualified to. But we have to remember, we are in uncharted territory here as a country. We have never experienced such an influx of illegal migration in such a short period of time, where the number of people coming illegally exceeded the numbers coming legally. The share of our population that is foreign-born is higher than it has ever been before. And I think we as a country, we're resilient. We're going to manage that, but we don't need to accept what happened over the last 4 years is some kind of new normal, or just sit back and say, oh, well, we can't do anything about it, because the government can. Many of these people have not been here very long.
We are in the question portion of our evening. And I'll give you the first question because it's basically where you started, which is the question is it realistic to deport all those considered, and the question uses the word illegal, but I think for our purposes we're using the word documented. Is it realistic? This gets...
I don't think it is. And I think we have just proven just the question that you asked Jessica, is that how is it working out? The number of people who are being arrested, first of all, is not hugely different from under the Biden administration. And arrests are not equalizing deportation. In fact, so much so that the DHS has stopped issuing numbers of people they're deporting, which tells me something, that the goal is not being met. We're getting numbers about deportation only from the Mexican government. And the Mexican government says that the number of people since President Trump took over is about 577 a day. At the end of the Biden administration, it was 800 a day. So it's more shock and awe and martial music than actual outcome, which is partly the agenda of this administration, that's more important than outcome. So I don't think we are going to achieve the results that they expected. Therefore, I think deporting 13.6 million people is a pipe dream, however militaristic we want to be.
Jessica, let me feel free to answer that question again. In this idea of is it realistic? But is there a maybe suboptimal outcome by your perspective, which would be do shock and awe to lower the number of people coming between border crossings, send the signal to the rest of the world you are not welcome, take care of the criminals. I think the Homan his goal is 1 million deportations in a year. That's a good pace, and that you're not going to be able to get rid of all 13 million, but that there is a second best alternative.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, the shock and awe is important because it's not so much to say you're not welcome, it's more to say there's no point in coming illegally now because you're not going to be released into the country indefinitely, and that does work. The number of apprehensions at the border of people trying to cross illegally has gone from the high of 11,000 a day at one point in the last few years to less than 300 a day. So that's working. The deportations are higher than they have been in previous administrations also. They said 37,000 in the last month, which is, well, if they continue that for a year, is well over any other record of monthly deportations, or excuse me, annual deportations. But look, we cannot expect, and I don't even think the government should try to actually arrest and forcibly remove everyone who's in the country illegally. What it should do is prioritize the most important cases, and anyone here illegally is potentially subject to arrest and removal. But as a reality, they're not going to need to go after the 16 million people, or even the 8 million who came in the last 4 years, because people get the message that once they can't get a job, can't get a driver's license, can't collect certain welfare benefits, then they're going to realize they're not fools. They know that there's no point to living here illegally if they can't support themselves and their family. And if you talk to migrants, as I have, most of them come here thinking they're going to stay as long as they can to make money and go back home. And they understand that, the party is pretty much over now, different policies in place. And we know from experience that when enforcement is robust, people do decide to go home on their own. And we have to remember also, many of the people who have come recently were, like Haitians, for example, they didn't come from Haiti. They were resettled in other countries like Brazil and Chile and Peru and sometimes in Europe. They can go back to those countries also.
These are the parole...
right, the parolees.
A question here is, voters don't seem to create a distinction between the types of immigration. How are they identifying the immigrants that they are going after? So I guess that's a question about the Trump administration. In answering that question, And maybe both of you can tackle this, to sort of help us define our terms when we talk about the different categories of, I mean, there's legal immigration, and then there's illegal immigration, but can you give us a sense of what are the categories that we're talking about? And when we talk about illegal, there are those who are claiming asylum, there are those who jump the border, it's harder to do now, and just melt into the country. There are those who are picked up multiple times, which tend to inflate those numbers. Can you help define some of these classes?
Sure. First of all, let's agree, Jessica, on one thing. I think the last 4 years was not a great chapter for immigration in our country. I think it will have a long shadow on the immigration policy and politics of our country, and but in categories, you can be unauthorized in the following ways. You either enter the country illegally, you didn't have permission to enter, visa to enter, or you enter the country legally and then overstayed the terms of your visa. Now, the additional elements is the people who did come to the border without authorization and sought asylum. You have the right to do that. And once you seek asylum, you have to get a hearing. And that hearing could take years.
Yeah.
So there are a number of people who are in that, what we call increasingly liminal status. There are also about 500,000 people who were granted temporary protected status given to various countries over the years since 1990. They're also in liminal status because they have no guarantee to be permanent residents. There are also, more recently, the programs. We had a parole program for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, Afghans, and Ukrainians. These are 6 parole programs. Again, no pathway to permanent residence. We call them all liminal status. It looks like the president is trying to end these liminal statuses one by one. So therefore, you're not only talking about 13.6 million people, you're talking with about close to 3 million people in liminal statuses. That's the picture of truly unauthorized plus liminal.
And Jessica, build on that if you'd like, or this question of how do they know who they're going after? You mentioned was it 37,000 or 3,700?
37,000 removals in the last month, according to
Where did you get the number?
Reuters. Reuters reported it.
DHS has stopped giving out numbers. I'm just telling you, but it tells us something.
Because
it just came out today.
That number is, I mean, there is some low-hanging fruit. There are some people who are, in the country, undocumented, and they're in a prison cell. Easy to get them out. So,
unless it's a sanctuary.
Well, join the definition, or how do they know who to go after? Because at some point, to get all the undocumented, you have to start going into places that are a little more complicated than a jail cell.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that rightfully should be the ICE's first priority, is those that it finds out about because they've been arrested for state and local crimes and been, are in custody. There are plenty of ways. Many, as we've been discussing, many of these individuals are on the dockets of the immigration courts, and eventually their cases are going to play out. Now, as for the asylum applicants, what we know from Department of Justice data is that of the people who are allowed into the country because they say they fear return, about half of them actually file an application for asylum. Those people are, on the docket, they're waiting for their hearings. About half of them won't show up for their hearings, but we still know who they are. And of those who do go through the entire process, it turns out that only about 10% end up being approved for asylum by an immigration judge. But all of these people are on a docket, and we have information on them. And so the idea, if people are ordered removed, they should be removed. And a lot of times there are extra penalties if they don't go home when they are supposed to. But we do have information on them. We have their names. We have, we know where they were living. But that's a difficult thing to go around to try to knock on doors. And that's why I think it's important to deter them from wanting to stay by cracking down on employers, to make it difficult for them to get any benefit from being here illegally.
That group you're talking about, they're in the asylum system, though, right? So in order to get them out, don't they have to go before a judge and then have that adjudicated? And because of the backlogs, you may have their name, but it's going to be months before, years before they ever get through the process to be able to send them home if they don't have a valid case.
Right, but
so
that's probably, I think it's what, 2.5 million people on the asylum docket now?
Close to 3 million.
Close to 3. So that's a small share of the population that's...
But John, those are not the people who are getting picked up. I mean, the question for the audience today was, broadly speaking, it really is random. The people who get the first raid that happened was in Newark, an auto body. They had name of one person there, but in the process, they arrested about 14 other people. One of them was a U.S. citizen, a Marine. They felt embarrassed when he put his military card out, because that's what randomness does.
I don't think it was random, it was a targeted operation.
It was not targeted.
The employee.
You may have one person, but the rest of them, what we now call collaterals, are picked up, who may have no criminal record, but they get picked up. That's
they
the
get
randomness.
picked up because they're in the country.
Because they're in that shop at that time.
Right.
That's the randomness. Or people are coming at the border, pregnant women are being deported. I mean, that's what the reporting is, in chains. There's no reason to do that. It's morally offensive.
But don't you think it's morally offensive to just ignore the law?
You can ignore the law without chaining people, Jessica.
Well, the only people who are chained are those who are determined to be a public safety threat.
No.
I mean,
everyone is chained on a military flight, not public threats.
But the people who are put on those flights are higher priority.
No, they're all being deported. They're deportees.
But that's because they're the highest priority, which is those who are public safety threats. Did you see the interviews of people in Panama? A Christian Iranian family, an Afghan girl being deported to Taliban Afghan. They don't sound like high priorities to me. I have not heard about those cases.
Just read the New York Times, front page story of the New York Times by reporters at the hotel.
The question is whether if you've got a situation where you go to a body shop, there's the one criminal guy, for sure he's criminal, and then there are other undocumented there, they all get put on the same bus. So he's the criminal, worthy of shackling. The others have broken the law by being here. They are undocumented.
But they're treated differently by ICE. If the ones who are immediately removable,
Could you tell me how are they treated differently? They all put in removal proceedings.
Because some of them are going to be entitled to a different form of due process. If you're a criminal, or if you've been here less than 2 years, you're eligible for an accelerated form of due process. If they've applied for asylum, they may be arrested, but they're going to be released until ICE can't touch them until their proceedings play out.
I agree,
you know this.
but I agree with if you're an asylum seeker, but these are not asylum
or
seekers.
if they, maybe they've been sponsored by somebody. They're all different ways. They're treated differently according to their circumstances. If they're a breadwinner of a family, they're more than likely going to be released. Just because they're arrested doesn't mean there's a trap door that sends them.
That's not the prosecutor's discretion. That's happening. That's the reality.
I
it's
disagree
broad
with you.
And it's random.
The facts show otherwise, honestly.
Let's, as our final question here, because we touched on it before, but I think it's in the economic conversation we've had. Are there accurate analyses, and of course there's debate, but over the contribution of undocumented immigrants on payroll taxes, whether they and then what they use in terms of services, whether it's Medicaid or educational services. Is there any way to help people get their heads around those numbers?
Let me start. I mean, I do think that the contribution of unauthorized is the least appreciated phenomenon. They all pay taxes. They may not pay under their own Social Security numbers, which is why Social Security is, you could say that they're subsidizing our Social Security system. They're making contributions, and they will never be eligible for receiving Social Security. That's a net benefit. I don't know how one could argue against that. Not to mention, we mentioned all the industries and occupations that are reliant. The National Academy of Sciences, our principal body that has concluded, as lately as 2 years ago, that unauthorized people in net pay more contributions to the federal, state, and local coffers than they receive in benefits. And the reason for that is they're not entitled to benefits. The only benefits they're entitled to is basic public education and emergency medical care. And that not because the law provides them, that's because court decisions have said that that's true. That's why it's a net benefit.
Well, I disagree with that. I do agree that many people here illegally are paying taxes in some form. Usually it's sales tax. Sometimes for the half that are working on the books, they may have some withholding. But the payments to them as a group for emergency medical care, schooling, food stamps, housing assistance, and so on, far exceed what they are contributing in some form of tax payments.
What's your basis for saying that?
Well, the fact is that people here illegally do qualify for certain benefits.
I know the net part. What's your basis for concluding that?
It adds up to more.
By which, and I just go to the National Academy of Sciences and Study.
National Academy of Sciences. We have a litany of reports on our website where people have shown that we pay more in welfare benefits to illegal-headed households, illegal immigrants collecting welfare, than they are contributing in taxes. And they do qualify for these programs. 7 states allow people here illegally to collect welfare benefits, and more than 30 states allow benefits to be paid out, Medicaid and other TANF, to kids in illegal alien-headed households.
We're going to have to...
It's enormous.
We're going to have to leave it there. The voting is now open for our initial question, which should the federal government broadly seek to remove undocumented immigrants across the country. Your opportunity now, while you're participating in that vote, we're going to have the 1 point that each of you would concede, or not concede, maybe that's a bad word choice, reflect on something that the other said this evening. Moose, I'll start with you.
Well, I think I think there's probably some agreement between Jessica and I that I hope that we still need immigration.
Yes, of course.
We may disagree on the level. Let me just, as we are concluding, remind us that we did not become the only superpower of the world from nothing. I mean, except for the native-born, Native Americans in this country, we're all either immigrants or descendants of immigrants. That we became the economic superpower of the world by descendants of European peasants and African slaves, Hispanic farm workers, Chinese railway workers. And it has sustained us in every stage of our development as a country. And we are probably, given the demographic pressure, we probably need that much more than we have ever needed if we want to remain an economic power of the world at the level we are at. So hopefully we'll get to agree on a number that makes that possible, but we hope we agree that we should remain an economic power in the world.
Jessica, you're...
Yes, and that's why I think, to come back to a point I made in my opener, that, to the extent we tolerate high levels of illegal immigration, it undermines public support for immigration generally. I do take your point that it's very difficult to think about how we would, or if we should, remove people who've been here for a very long time without causing problems, say 10 years or more. I know MPI has published the numbers on the numbers of people in that category, and that is harder. But the point is that it is not up to ICE or a president to decide if the law is going to be enforced. That's if there is some relief for people who've been here for a long time or who shouldn't be a priority for deportation, such as an Afghan schoolgirl, That's not for ICE, that's not for the president, that is for our Congress to decide under our system. Congress has authority to decide which categories of legal immigration we're going to have, and it needs to be left up to Congress. This can't be something that presidents are going rogue on.
All right,
or the enforcement agency.
Let's see if we have our vote.
What about the path to citizenship for those who've been here for a long time, let's say?
I completely agree. I think that's, oh, Jessica, sorry.
Hey. Go ahead.
No, she's asking Jessica, I think.
Sure. I think that Congress should work that out, and there is a potential solution once, if immigration laws are actually going to be enforced, to potentially offer that to people who've been here a long time. But I don't think we should do it before we're actually enforcing our immigration laws, and I think that if we're going to do that, we might need to talk about getting rid of some of the other categories of legal immigration so that it can be accommodated within a reasonable amount of legal immigration.
All right, I'm not quite sure I understand this. I guess there were non-respondents?
There are 9 people who are holding out.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Okay. So at the end of the conversation, that more people at the end said no than before. Before, there was a small group that said that they preferred the federal government, broadly speaking, trying to remove undocumented immigrants. All right. Well, thank you both for participating in this discussion. And thank you all who submitted questions for the evening. That concludes our conversation.
Thank you.